Hello everyone. I hope you all enjoyed the first part. There's something really satisfying about getting things out there for the world to see, especially something like this. For anyone tuning in for the first time, it may be helpful to watch the first part to get an idea of what's happening, just in case I spoil anything for you. But a thank you goes out to everyone who has been watching it so far. So here we are, the second part of Pouakai. Tui's stomach rumbled. He searched his pouch and remembered he'd eaten the last of the moa meat. Now what? Food, hunger, need to eat, can't go on, must go on, have to. Tui floundered for a while, not making sense of anything. The forest looked the same everywhere he looked. Hoapa clung to his shoulder. A resonant bellow. Tui spun round. Food. Plenty of food. The sound led him to a small clearing. He heard vegetation crackle underfoot and a long neck extended outwards. A giant moa. The meat on a giant moa was substantial. Even one could feed most of the hapu for 3 days. A second moa emerged, then a third. They bellowed and 2 of them leaned in to preen each other. The other one was grazing. I need you to stay here. Hoapa's claws left his shoulder with some protest, but otherwise he didn't make a big fuss. He worried that he might wander, so it pleased him when he saw Hoapa hunker down and not move. Tui crept towards them, and the moas saw him but paid him no mind. They were a dream to have, and the hapu thanked Hain Mahuta for providing them. They were so big, so meaty, and so many. They were easy to catch because they didn't run away. On hunting trips, Tui had seen Hunipo go right up to them, and they didn't do anything, unless they did what Makareta did. Hunipo took his leadership skills seriously. He micromanaged everyone around him, especially Tui. While Hunipo had the tendency to be domineering, as time went on there were occasions where he liked to make fun of things he felt were beneath him. Tui had been the victim of his pranks, whether it was putting wetters in his hair, splashing him with water whilst he slept, or if they were hunting, he'd had a habit of leading the group in and then deliberately withdrawing and watched for the moment when Tui realised he was on his own. The bellows of the moas had made him run away. But sometimes he would do something stupid to something else. For his friend's amusement, he would walk right up to a moa. To block its escape, he would have the others surrounded. It would then lower its head to look at him. Then Hunipo would make faces towards his friends before clubbing the moa over the head. If there were other moas there, the amusement was doubled by their lack of concern. Any others there wouldn't make it out alive. But there was just him. There was no question of whether he would get close enough. What worried him was what would happen if he didn't strike true. Hunipo was good at it, but others often botched it. This would lead to the moa bellowing and then running away. The legs, of course, were the most dangerous. Makareta had met his end trying to copy Hunipo. He was halfway over to them when the moas started to bellow again. 2 of them ran away, but the other hesitated and something huge slammed into its back. The moa shrieked and rolled across the ground, over its long neck. Tui watched in astonishment. The Pouakai drove its claws into its shoulders and tore at its neck. The moa kicked, feebly. The Pouakai was at the wrong angle to be kicked. It lay still. Tui shivered. The Pouakai was right there, tearing ribbons of meat. Be careful. Big claws. Might get injured. Might die. He took another step forward. If he missed, if it saw him, just throw it, suck it up, throw it, do it now, no, fear, pain, too great, if I have to run, my ankle. The Pouakai looked up. Its face dripped red. Tui froze. Throw it, now, no, pain too great, now. The Pouakai took to the air. Tui threw the spear. It caught it above the shoulder and removed only a few feathers. Then it was away into the sky. Tui was relieved it hadn't gone for him, but that relief soon vanished. You stupid boy! Stupid, stupid, stupid! If you hadn't hesitated, it would be over by now. You would have the Pouakai and be able to bring it back to Maya. He stormed off and smashed a tree trunk with the staff. Coward! Coward! He took another smash at the tree and another and another. Stupid coward! He saw Hunipo gloating at him. Tui. Stupid, cowardly Tui. Then he saw Maya grinning, embracing Hunipo and leading him to her shelter, with Kaihautu, Akahata, and the rest of the Hapu and the gods looking on with murmurs of approval. Tain Mahuta! Tuma Twenga! Why do you hate me so much? The only reply was the chuckle of a kaka, a large brown forest parrot. Go home. Go back. Hunipo and his friends will be on their way. He made his way along the trail, back to the camp. He'd had his chance, and he'd blown it. We don't know that. They could be stuck for all I know. He would be back at the camp by afternoon if he carried on this way. Kaihautu would kill him, without a doubt. But he no longer cared. Or did he? Tui stopped. If he was going to kill me, I'd rather live on my feet for the next month than die on my knees tomorrow. He turned away. I just have to find the Pouakai again. It'll come back. Perhaps it'll even go for me. Maybe that's the best way after all. He continued for a while, heading away from camp. Hoapa was nibbling his hair, something he didn't like. Even so, it took him by surprise when he stopped. Hoapa flattened his body against his shoulder. What are you doing? Whoosh. It came from overhead. Whoosh. Then a massive shadow passed over them. Tui's terror nearly took charge of him. Afraid, hurting, hungry, oh, hurting so much. He put Hoapa on the ground and he was climbing the nearest tree he could find. The branches snapped and the needles fell. Tui hurried to the top and saw to his amazement a Pouakai flying towards a gap between two mountains. Perfect. I just need to head west. If I keep going west, I'll find the gap. Thank you, Hoapa. For food, he caught some wekas, a kind of brown forest rail, and stuffed them into his pouch. He found a stream to drink from, then saw that it led to a lake, and on this lake were some vast reed beds. The lake was brimming with water birds, especially ducks and herons. It made him regret not thinking to bring a net or some fishing line. There were, however, several harakeki plants growing in the open swampland, bearing their long stalks with flowers arranged alternately along their stems. The flower stalks themselves were flanked by massive grassy leaves. From these, Tui fashioned himself some snares. He didn't want to stay long at this lake, but it was too good an opportunity to miss. He set the snares in the reed beds and accidentally flushed a big brown and yellow bird that looked like a heron, most likely a Matuku huripo. This was a secretive bird that liked reed beds and ate eels and frogs. He returned later to find that it hadn't snared the Matuku huripo, but it had snared some ducks. Papangos, they were called. His first two had caught two plain brown females, and in another, a male with a blacker face. He speared some fish in the shallows, and these he ate raw straight away. He felt in better spirits than he had, and his ankle felt so much better, though it still hurt. The way ahead was clear. The Pouakais would still be a danger, but it didn't see him, and it looked like its mind was set on going elsewhere. Just think, Maya and I, together. If nobody likes it, then they'll have to split us apart the way the gods did. The gods had only known their freedom when they'd worked together to push their father Rangi and their mother Papa apart. If they hadn't, everything would still remain in darkness, locked in the embrace of their parents. Tuma Twenga had wanted to kill Rangi and Papa, but Tain Mahuta persuaded all but one of the others to split them apart. As a team, they'd pushed. It took days. Tain Mahuta himself lay on his head and pushed with his feet, and the embrace between their parents was broken forever. Even today, whenever the mist rose into the sky, Papa was still grieving from the split. The birds sang loudly as he went. Wekas crept through the undergrowth. Kakas cawed loudly. Some dwarf moas ran away as he approached. But then he heard a resonant bellow and saw 3 giant moas ahead of them, heads down in the undergrowth. Then the forest thinned and opened out, like it did at the camp, but here it seemed colder. The wind was stronger and the vegetation gave way to big tussocks of grass. The grass proved to be sharp underfoot, and Tui was speared many a time. The kakapo was nearly sent flying, but he barely moved. The pain made him stop for a while. The wind nearly took off his Hawaii feathers, so he took it off and weighed it down with his pouch. The grass had pierced his skin as if they were stakes. And yet he felt something akin to elation. He wondered if Hunipo and his friends had already succeeded. He pushed the thought aside. There's no evidence. You're here, and that's what you know right now. You're grown up just to get here. He took off the Hawaii headcrest and examined the trailing feathers. They were long and exquisite. Just by getting here at all, he felt like a chief. These are mine now. Kaihautu does like to strut around and tell everybody what to do. He doesn't have his precious staff and crest now. I made the strongest statement I can make that you can't keep squashing me without consequence. Perhaps Kaihautu, Hunupo and Mother will have their turn now. He laughed to himself and took another bite of meat. All I have to do now is find that Pouakai and not hesitate. The next time I will throw my spear and it will strike true. As the day passed, the wind began to whistle. He heard what sounded like laughter. Keas, brown parrots that lived in the mountains. Kaihautu often talked about their boldness towards people, but he also told less flattering tales. When Tui looked to his front, he saw a kea sat right next to him, flexing its hooked bill and peering at him with mischievous eyes. Tui made a move to grab it. These could be eaten after all. The kea fluttered away. As Tui chased after it, he realised that the other one was behind him. That one took his pouch high and disappeared. Hey! Then he felt a sudden breeze at his head. No, not the feathers! Kaihautu had obtained those feathers in his youth. They were never going to be replaceable. He was disoriented. His mood dropped. Even if he got a Pouakai, Kaihautu would definitely kill him when he got back. He howled, kicked the ground, paced in circles, shouted to the sky. Is this what you think of me, Tain Mahuta? Are you enjoying this? His stomach rumbled and he remembered the food was gone. He needed food and went looking for tracks. It took him most of the day, but he found a takahe burrow and waited for the massive blue rail with its bright red bill to emerge. When it did, he grabbed its throat, and while the bird clawed, Tui twisted its neck. Then he realised he had nothing to start a fire, and knew it would have to be eaten raw. He didn't have a shelter either. There was no wood to make one. Tohiri sent a blizzard down onto the valley, and Tui hugged the slope with nothing but his 3 moa hides to shield him. Why did I ever come here? Even the gods want me dead. Maybe I should go back and let Kaihautu deal with that. Then he saw Hoapa lying unprotected on his own. He'd taken him off his shoulder for fear he might get blown off. Get up! Hoapa didn't move. Get up! We're moving on! There was still no response. You've been like this all day, ever since we got up here. It's not my fault you can't keep up. Something made him stop there. He should have realised it earlier. Kakapos were forest birds that kept away from windswept mountains. When he went to check on the kakapo, he found that his moss-green feathers were soaked. His browner feathers on his head were dishevelled. The kakapo wasn't moving. Oh no. Kaihautu would be upset to lose his feathers, but to lose his pet, especially one taken without permission. He took the kakapo and swaddled him inside his cloaks. He was about to lie on his stomach. Then the squash of Hoapa's body told him that if he lay like this, he would crush him, so he lay on his side. The wind howled. He felt the prickle of his feathers against his body and was desperately afraid that Hoapa might not survive the night. The moa hides didn't protect him fully from the cold. His hands were numb and he worried they would go black with frostbite. Kaihautu had told him of fellow hunters who had fallen this way, and those that didn't had to have their fingers and toes cut off. Let's go back. It's over. Just accept that Hunupo will have Maya. Her belly will swell with his children. Healthy, happy children that feel no fear, no pain, and have no trouble talking to others. Either way, you're going to die. The snow was so dense now. He couldn't see more than a few feet. Must find shelter. He heard the gods' laughter on the wind, their mocking voices. What did you think would happen when you tried to claim things you hadn't earned? The crest doesn't belong to you. You are not a chief. He scooped up the kakapo and tried to walk. Tui felt certain he would collapse, face first. Then he did. Hoapa went flying from his hands. He should have frozen to death right there. Need shelter. Need food. Takahe wasn't enough. But how was he going to get food in this whiteout? How? No, need shelter first, food later. We're going to die. Hoapa lay in the snow, unmoving. He edged down the slope and scooped him up. It was only when he got closer did he realise that Hoapa was teetering on the edge of a precipice. He found a rocky ledge, barely suitable, but it would have to do. The wind could still buffet him, and icicles dripped on top of his head. His moa hides were soaked and only added to his cold. but there was nothing else to cover himself with, and nothing else to cover Hoapah. Hoapah! He unwrapped the kakapo from his cloaks and cradled him in his arms. Please don't go. I need you. You make me feel like a chief. The kakapo stayed limp. Tain Mahuta! Tumatwenga! If you want me to succeed, please give Hoapah a second chance. The kakapo stayed limp. Tui soon realised how he must have sounded. I shouldn't have brought you here. I wasn't thinking. It's not your fault. You were cold and I did nothing until it was too late. That's not what a chief would do. I should have protected you, offered you safety. I didn't. Safety. When Hoapah didn't move, Tui decided there was no choice but to sleep on it. Losing Huaya feathers was one thing, but if he lost Hoapah, Kaihautu would definitely kill him. Maybe Tohiri would do the chief's job for him. He slept, half hoping he would never wake again. But when he did wake the next morning, the blizzard had passed and the snow lay in a blinding carpet. He felt a scratch against his knee and saw that Hoapah's feet were twitching. The kakapo looked up at him with a weary gaze. Hoapah! He hugged the kakapo, and the bird seemed to accept it, until he felt stifled and scrabbled to get out. It gave him new energy to look for food. He looked for the tracks of Takahe and Kia, but there were none, and when he did come across some tracks, they were much too big for either. He heard a resonant bellow. He saw a moa ahead of him, all on its own. Mountain moas, smaller than the giants found in the lowlands. Tui had his spear at the ready. The moa seemed disoriented, listless in its pacing. Tui was about to thrust at it when he saw a shadow pass over him. Whoosh! Somehow it didn't see either of them. The Pouakai flew over them and perched on a cliff just out of sight. He heard what sounded like cries. He had an idea. He put Hoapah to one side and told him not to move. Thankfully he did just that. He tried his best to jab at the moa, but a short spear was a far from ideal tool to do so. Even then moas were best hunted as a team, not solo, and with nets to trip them up. But Kaihautu had managed it, and that had been a giant moa. This smaller mountain one should be easier. He felt a whoosh past him, and something nicked his cheek. The claws. Don't forget the claws. That was how Mother's #1 child came to an end. Stupid boy. Don't die like him. That will be a joke Mother would never forget. A breath closer, and Tui would have been kicked full in the face, and that would have been lethal. No, don't do this. Back away. Try something easier. There is nothing easier. This is all there is. He thrust the spear. The moa bellowed, and Tui moved round and stabbed its neck. The spear point tore a hole, and it ran around in circles, staining the snow red. Whoosh! The Pouakai swooped in and seized the moa by the back. The moa collapsed almost instantly. It writhed and kicked to no avail. The Pouakai stuck its head inside its neck and fed. Tui watched in awe. It looked like a giant next to him. It must have stood to his waist height. It would have stood eyeball to eyeball with small children. He heard the tearing of meat and the squelch of blood and organs. He raised his spear. The Pouakai looked up, its face stained red. Tui froze in his tracks. The two hunters stared at one another. Tui braced himself and was surprised to see that the Pouakai returned to its meal. He crept forward. When the Pouakai looked at him again, he was within throwing distance. The pain, the cold, the hunger. End it now. End it forever. No, wait. Get closer. No, now. Tui shook violently. He threw the spear. It whistled over the Pouakai's nape. It leapt back, startled. It spread its wings and bore down on him. Tui didn't have time to get his staff. The Pouakai hit him like a boulder. It tore and clawed loudly. The claws dug deep into Tui's skin, ripping shreds. Tui screamed and tried to draw his knife. He grasped the handle, braced his arm against its breast, and stabbed. The Pouakai leapt back. Tui gritted his teeth and threw the knife. It flew too high over the Pouakai's head and landed in the snow. He drew the staff. Unsteady. The Pouakai hitched into the air and flew away. Come back! I haven't finished with you! Tui found himself alone. He grimaced. The claws had shredded his cloaks to rags. He clutched himself, shivering. He howled. Tain Mahuta! You've had your laugh now, haven't you? There was no answer, except the wind. Perhaps this was it. Perhaps I should just accept things the way they are. Maya will bear Hunapo's children. The Hapu would stay strong. If the Hapu were to have a strong future with strong, healthy people, it's not in their interest for me to keep going. He retrieved Hoapa and climbed down. The wind whipped at his torn cloaks. He wept, though it made his eyes cold. He wanted to go back. If he could just find it again. The nest was nearby, and he realised that to his chagrin that the mountain moa carcass would still be there, and that he could have waited for it to come back. Then he would kill it. It would be over, and he could leave this mountain with dignity. Then everything would be safe. When he got to the forest's edge, he looked back one last time. Let's stay here. Just think about it for a time. If you still don't feel up to it, you can go back. He stayed there for some time, until it was late in the day. The wind whipped the mountain, but then he saw what looked like half a dozen figures going up. He recognised them. Hunapo. He cursed himself. He'd lost the high ground and they were getting higher. Need to go back up. No, we'll never make it. They'll find it first. The carcass, the nest. Or will they? Tui walked briskly, back up the slope. They were well abreast of him. There was no way he'd catch up unless he called out to them. That probably wouldn't be a good idea. He kept following them, hoping tiredness, curiosity, or dispiritedness would slow them down. Whether they had these things or not, the gap didn't close much. At last they stopped, presumably because it was getting dark. It began to snow again. He watched them prepare a fire, in the same place he'd last faced the Pouakai. To his dismay, they were roasting what remained of the mountain moa on the fire. I really hate them. They've just made it harder. Now we'll have to come up with a new plan. The clouds had parted. The stars were out, though neither reduced the cold. There was little wind, but whatever breezes there were chilled any bare skin. Tui felt that most strongly in his fingers. He would have to wait till dawn. He knew where the nest was and realised with gut-wrenching fear and anger what he would have to do. He would have to climb up, take the chicks and use them to lure the adults down. The cloaks didn't keep him warm anymore. They were so wet and shredded. If anything, he was more likely to freeze with them on than off. He dug inside the snow. A midnight blue in this light. He carved himself and Hoapa a hole. It was cramped and not the most stable, but it would have to do. He woke to find orange sunlight spearing through his hole. It was poking above the horizon. Tui cursed himself. He'd wanted to go out with some darkness on his side. Now the others would be getting up and would have more chance of seeing him. He had no time to lose. He climbed the cliff. Flecks of ice whipped into his face. His fingers at times refused to move. He grimaced. There were no safe ledges to grip onto. If he wanted to go back to safety, he'd have to descend all the way down. He felt giddy. The sun was already shining onto the snow and giving him snow blindness. Sometimes he would dislodge a rock and send it crashing below. He steadied himself. Just keep going. You're on the verge of completing the same quest that Taha Otawera did. In fact, you'll do better than him. Taha Otawera, also known as Hotir, had been a visiting hunter who had been tasked by the local iwi to take down a Pouakai that had been terrorising the villagers. He had taken 50 armed men and he had set a trap of manuka saplings, a place to house all 50 of them so that when Hotir lured it from its nest, they would strike. The Pouakai saw him and he ran back to the trap, just as it pounced on him. All 50 speared it to death, and that was the end of its terror. Tui's trap was not nearly so elaborate. He didn't have 50 warriors. There were 7 down there, and they were not his friends. He would have to do it alone. He felt good, painless. Then a chunk of rock broke from beneath him, and his feet hung in mid-air. Only his hands held onto the cliff. He screamed, cried, staggered for a new grip. His feet found new ledges, but they could only hold his toes. He hugged the cliff, managed to find some stability, but he was trapped. Tui's tears flooded. Why did I come back? Why did I try again? This is stupid. I'm going to fall. This time Kaihautu's not here to save me. He thought back to that day. He remembered his wails and howls, his mortal pleas to Kaihautu to not let him fall. He remembered the laughter, the way it rose like a thunderstorm, softly at first till it exploded. It got louder the further down they came. Hunapo was laughing. So were his friends, and when they got back to camp, so was Maya and Mother. Tui's own father had met his end this way too. Hunipo was being stupid. He'd climbed a cliff like this one, and when he couldn't get down, it was Tui's father, Kahurangi, that had been tasked to rescue him. Annoyingly, Hunipo had managed to get himself down, and Kahurangi fell to his death when a rocky ledge broke beneath his feet. Hunipo was reprimanded. Again. Both of Tui's male relatives were dead because of him. If Mother knew he died like this, that would be an irony his spirit would have to live with. He wasn't going to be next. No one was here to rescue him. Go up, go down. It was his choice. Or die trying either way. If I'm going to die, let's have it said that it was as a result of me going up. He felt new life in his limbs. He grabbed another ledge, and 1 inch at a time came higher. Whoosh. He spun round to see the Pouakai circling, on its way somewhere. He pressed on till he found the nest. It was a thick mass of sticks which could have housed a small child. He froze when he saw that one of the parents was there. He'd never felt more exposed. He stared at it anxiously. It was facing the wrong way, that was lucky, but he realised that his plan wouldn't work. He then saw the bird's head was tucked into its feathers. Perhaps it was asleep. Tui realised he had to make a decision. If he did nothing, the parent might wake up, or if it didn't, then the other would come eventually, and then they would both see him. If he could creep close enough. He reached out. The bird was seized by the neck, and Tui broke it before it could do anything. He threw the body below, and it landed next to Hoapa, who was watching anxiously from below. He found the nestlings, 2 of them, white and still fluffy with down. He reached for them. They snapped at him with their long bills, but he soon got a hold of them. He wanted to keep them alive, at least initially. He regretted not having his pouch. They would have to go down inside his cloak. He hoped that they wouldn't chew too much from the inside. He climbed down, precariously, expecting any moment for the other parent to come clawing at him. He decided that it would be best to carry on with his original plan. One of the adults might be down, but he was lucky to take it out in the circumstances he'd found it. He made it down and placed the chicks in front of him. They wailed and cried. Tiny, feeble things sat on the ice. There was a caw, and down came the Pouakai. Tui raised his spear. The adrenaline flooded him. Fear. Must run. No. Concentrate. Don't mess up. It bore down on him. Tui threw the spear. It took the bird by its left foot. It swerved. The spear was still embedded. Tui ducked. It circled, curving round the mountainside, and came in again. Tui took a swing. The whalebone staff struck the breast. It hovered backwards, momentum lost. Its claws groped for his chest. When Tui tried another swing, it caught the staff and after a struggle wrenched it off him. It flew away with the staff, dropping it several paces from him. Then it swooped in again. Its wings were in his face. It was on top of him. The claws sank into his flesh, tore the cloak worse than before. Tui caught it by the neck. Its bill snapped at his wrist, and when it couldn't get it, it went for his face, for the eyes. Tui tightened his grip on the bird's throat. One hand went to his hip to draw his knife. The bird snapped at his hand at just the right moment, and he dropped it. He released the throat. The bill went through his cheek. Tui grabbed its neck with both hands. It struggled. Its bill shredded his hands. He rolled over. Its wings battered him. He squeezed hard. The claws raked his chest. He twisted. The neck cracked, twisted to one side. The wings stopped flapping. The claws stopped raking. Tui stood up. "What have you done?" Hunipo stood there, with his party of 6, deprived of the power of speech. "It's dead," said Tui. "The Pouakai is dead." He retrieved the staff, the dead male Pouakai, and clubbed the nestlings. "It's over." The others cheered. Except Hunipo. "That belongs to my father." He nodded at the staff. "Where's his head crest?" The Kias took it. "And his knife?" Tui showed it to him. Hunipo walked up to him with a menacing gait. Then something strange happened. He paused. Then he smiled. "Well done, Tui!" He clapped a hand on his shoulder. Tui grimaced. "Are we good?" "We're good." Hunipo's eyes glittered. It was a strange transformation to make within a few seconds, but Tui let it slide. Someone gave him a new pouch, larger than the one he used to have. In there he kept the dead Pouakais and their chicks. They reached the forest and decided to camp there for the night. Tui slept better than he had for days, but his new wounds still troubled him. The cloaks he had were useless and he discarded them. He woke up and found himself wanting to take the dead Pouakais and their chicks out of the pouch. It was fortunate that this pouch was large. Even so, it didn't quite close properly with all four inside. He examined the two adults, with their long yellow bills, brown feathers and sharp claws as long as his forefingers. The female larger. I wish it were me. Tui jumped. You startled me. Hunapo didn't apologise. Looks like you'll be getting Maya instead of me. Tui's voice caught in his throat. It's okay. You managed it. Fair and square. Tui stared. He wasn't used to getting praise from anyone, least of all from Hunapo. I hope you're happy. I am, said Tui. I feel like a man now. I'm hoping it's enough for your father not to kill me. We'll sort that out later. For now, just get some sleep. Tui did just that. When he woke the next morning, the others were gone. For a moment he panicked until he saw the pouch. For a heartbeat he'd expected Hunapo to have made off with it, but it was still there. Hoapa had gone, however, though he calmed himself by assuming the others had taken him with them. He walked around looking for the others, until he found Hunapo walking away into the forest. Hunapo? There was no reply. He'd shouted the name quite loudly and was surprised that he didn't hear. Hunapo! That time he should have heard, but he didn't appear to. He carried on walking. It wasn't important to speak to him anyway. He went looking for food. Kakas and tuis called. A small songbird called a tutuai sat on the leaf litter, gazing up at him with its grey face atop its white belly. He heard what sounded like voices. He went towards them hoping to find the others there. Perhaps they'd caught something. But he came to what looked like a small camp. It struck him as odd. Why would they build another camp when they already had one? He saw at least 4 figures milling around, but their tattoos were different. He realised that these were not of his hapu or even of his iwi. He realised which it was. This was one Kaihautu had fought many years ago. He raised his staff and crept forward for a closer look. They looked like warriors. They were on his iwi's land and were trespassing. He had an insane idea. He would do what nobody before him had done. He would do a haka alone. He would kick them out. Either they would yield and go away or they'd fight. If he couldn't take all of them himself, he would run and counterattack where he could. It would do his mana and his utu real good. Maya will not only appreciate you killing Pouakais, but fighting enemy iwis too. Succeed in both and she'll love you twice as much. You'll get one step closer to matching Kaihautu and even Akahata. You'll certainly beat Hunapo. He's never been to war. But you would. Tui checked his surroundings. He crept into the ferns to see if he could hear what they were saying. Their voices were muffled, hushed. Perhaps it was because it was early morning. It had a way of making people quiet. He got a look at someone. He recognised him. Taika, the son of the rival chief, Mahuta. A great honour it would be to defeat him. Time to do a haka. He bumped into something. A tree trunk. There were several tree trunks, it seemed. At least that's what they looked like from the ground. When he looked up, he saw that they were 2 warriors, both with long spears. He felt an impulse, feeling like he should say something clever, but the situation as it stood and the complexity of language couldn't give him a winning combination. Tui swung his face to the right, then tried to escape. They blocked him and struck him over the face with their shafts. The commotion drew the other warriors. What's going on? Tui looked towards Taika. Before Tui could answer, a voice cut over him. This is Tui! Hunapo stood there with his friends behind his back. You? Hunapo grinned. But what are you doing with these warriors? They're your father's enemies. They were. Now they're my allies. Why? This is our land. It belongs to both of us now. They're going to help me claim my father's position, if he won't give it to me himself. Wouldn't he appoint you anyway? Sadly, he won't. Though I have one more plan to see if he will. If that doesn't work, I'll take it by force. Tui was tied to a tree. When they'd left, Hoapa came scrabbling over. It was an oddly nice gesture to let him have Hoapa, though the kakapo could do nothing except waddle about and climb his shoulder. Tui would have ruffled his feathers if his hands allowed him to. He saw one of Hunupo's friends, a young boy, a year younger than himself. He was shorter than Tui, with a dishevelled mat of black hair and a round face with eyes that seemed to be forever frightened. Hunu? The boy turned his head. What are they doing over there? They're deciding how to overthrow the chief. Why aren't you with them? They don't really listen to me. I don't have much to add anyway. He came up to Tui with a frightened, conflicted look in his eyes. You don't believe them, do you? Said Tui. He'd wanted to say it with more conviction, but it came out like a plea. I don't know. I think you do. They said there would be mana and utu for me. Hunupo said I might even get a shot at Maya. Tui's voice caught in his throat. Do you really believe that? What difference does it make? I'm involved. I shouldn't even be talking to you. Why not? Hunu's voice wouldn't work. You don't believe them, I can tell. I need your help, Hunu. They're going to kill me. They're going to take over the Hapu, and Hunupo's going to take the credit for everything I've done. What can I do? You can tell the truth. They'll kill me. I also want mana and utu. I have little of both. Tui didn't doubt that. The poise was poignant because he'd wished death on Hunupo and his friends for what had happened. He wanted justice. He wanted respect. Having all 7 of these boys executed would be a cheer to his soul, a recompense for the life they'd ruined. Safety. Hoapa sensed it. He waddled between his legs and snuggled up to him. He gazed at the kakapo, awed by his trusting nature. But why did Hoapa trust him? He trusted everybody, didn't he? He was a kakapo. Of course he does. That's why kakapos were easy to hunt. Then Tui remembered the way Hoapa had been after his capture. Despite all these other figures, he never once went to them. He'd only gone to him. Then Tui saw what he meant to him. They'd been through an intense experience together. He remembered the cold night in the mountains, the way he'd cuddled up to Tui under the moa cloaks, the affectionate prune of his bill. It must have meant something to him. That if Hoapa had ignored all the others just to be with him, at this time when everyone would think of him as a thief, a fraud, and who knows what else, it had to say something about him, about his loyalty. Hoapa had rushed to his side, where he felt safest. Safest. Hunu, I can tell Kaihautu that you are following orders. If you tell him the truth, I can forgive you. He might give you a lesser punishment. It might mean you don't have to die. How can you be sure of that? I'm not sure. I know that I won't want you to suffer. If he insists on punishing you, I'll stick up for you. Hunu's emotions seemed to cave in at that point. He might insist on killing me. He might, or he might not. We don't know. Apart from risking my life, you're asking me to tell my friends. You're asking me to give up my chance for mana and utu. If they found out, wait till later, when we're back at camp. If all goes well, you'll get both in abundance. What if he still decides to execute me? He might execute me too. I stole his belongings, remember? If we can expose Hunupo's lies, maybe his father will forgive us. You can't be sure of that. No, but we can try. Hunupo and his friends came out of the shelter. Think about it, Hunu. The group's proximity closed any further conversation. Thank you everyone for watching. Things are really heating up, aren't they? Check back on my channel for news of the next part. I'm not quite clear at this point how many more parts I'll have. It depends how the editing works out, but not many more. See you all next time. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel Harris Brooker the Autistic Naturalist, click the like button, and don't be shy to post your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to buy my novel World Warrior if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.